Cal, you promised a woman spoke from my bedroom, her voice carrying over an acoustic guitar melody I did not recognize. The heavy plastic of my wedding dress garment bag scraped loudly against my right shoulder. The condensation from my iced coffee dripped down my thumb and hit the hardwood floor with a soft tap. A sickeningly sweet smell of burning vanilla hung heavy in the hallway air. I did not buy vanilla candles because they gave me migraines. I pushed the bedroom door open. My bed. The gray cotton sheets I washed on Sunday afternoon. Caleb, my fiancé of 8 months, sitting up with his back against my headboard. And a woman with highlighted hair pulling my white duvet cover up to her collarbone. Nobody moved. The acoustic guitar kept playing from the small speaker on Caleb's nightstand. "Kelsey," Caleb said. He pushed the sheets down. "What are you doing here? You are supposed to be at the clinic." "My last patient canceled," I said. My voice came out flat. I am 27 years old. I work as a dental hygienist in downtown Boise. My hands are constantly dry from washing them 30 times a shift between patients. I am a practical person. I like schedules and appointments and clear answers. I did not drop my coffee. I did not drop my dress. The woman looked at me, then turned her head to look at Caleb. "You told me she worked until 6. I shifted the iced coffee to my left hand. "She has a name," I told the woman, "and she lives here." "Do you, Kelsey?" "Stop," Caleb said. He reached for his jeans on the floor. "Go, wait in the living room." I did not scream. I stood in the doorway and I counted. That is what my brain does when the room spins. I count things to anchor myself. 1, the brown leather ankle boots in the hallway. 2, the vanilla candle burning on the dresser. 3, the playlist I had never heard. 4, the name Cal. I always called him Caleb. Nobody in his life called him Cal. 5, the woman sleeping on my side of the mattress. 5 things. 5 was enough. I turned around. The zipper of the garment bag clinked against the doorframe as I walked back out to the living room. I laid the plastic bag across the sofa. It looked completely hollow. I sat down on the edge of the cushion, pulled my phone from my pocket, and opened my Google Drive. I scrolled past the catering menus and the floral quotes until I found the shared folder Caleb created for our new house. I found the document labeled Lease Final 3842 Elm Street. I took a screenshot of the file name. I did not open it yet. The bedroom door clicked open. Caleb walked out. He had put on his jeans and a gray sweater. His hair was pushed back and he smelled sharply of his expensive cedarwood shampoo. He had taken exactly 5 minutes in that room, 5 minutes to put on his clothes and build his script. "It is not what you think," Caleb said. He stood by the kitchen island, gripping the granite counter. "She just came by to pick up some old boxes from college. I still had her stuff in the back of the closet. She was in our bed," I said. "Caleb," he sighed heavily. His shoulders dropped and his chin tilted down. He used the voice he usually saved for customer service agents who made mistakes. "You were not supposed to be home today. This would not be an issue if you had stayed at work like normal. Why did you leave early, Kelsey? You keep doing this. You always make a massive deal out of nothing." I looked at the hallway. "Whose shoes are those by the door?" Caleb dragged both hands down his face and pressed his fingers into his eyes. "I have been under so much pressure," he said, his voice straining. "I am working 60 hours a week, trying to pay for this wedding and the new house. I handle everything for us. And you come in here accusing me of cheating. Do you know what that does to me? I feel like I cannot do a single thing right in this relationship." He did not say he was sorry. He denied the reality of the bed. He blamed my work schedule. He attacked my reaction. And then he made himself the victim of my unfair expectations. 4 sentences. 0 apologies. I looked past him. On the kitchen counter sat a stack of mail I had brought up from the lobby box yesterday. Right on top was a white envelope from Capital One. My name was printed clearly on the front. Kelsey Marsh. Caleb saw where I was looking. He stepped sideways, grabbed the entire stack of envelopes, and shoved them into the top drawer of the kitchen island. "Just junk mail," he said quickly. "I will sort it out later." I stood up. "I am going back to work." Caleb blinked. He expected me to cry. He expected me to ask him if he still loved me. He needed me to beg for an explanation so he could grant me forgiveness for being suspicious. Instead, I picked up his car keys from the ceramic bowl by the door. I had sold my own car when we moved to Boise because he said we only needed one to save money. "Babe," Caleb called out as I opened the front door. "We are okay, right?" I walked out and let the door click shut behind me. The afternoon sun baked the black asphalt of the dental clinic parking lot. I sat in the driver's seat of Caleb's car for 30 minutes with the engine turned off and the windows rolled up. The air grew thick and heavy. Sweat pooled at the base of my neck. I kept my hands firmly gripped around the steering wheel. I stared straight ahead at the brick wall of the clinic. A sharp tap on the glass broke the silence. Gina stood outside, shielding her eyes from the sun. I rolled the window down. "You look like you just saw a ghost," Gina said. She was 43 years old, the office manager, and she had zero patience for nonsense. I looked at her face. "If someone uses your name for something you never agreed to," I asked slowly, "is that still your name?" Gina studied my eyes for 3 long seconds. She opened the car door. "Honey, come inside right now. And start from the very beginning." The break room smelled like burnt coffee grounds and antiseptic wipes. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed with a low, constant hum. I sat on a hard plastic chair and wrapped both hands around a paper cup of lukewarm water. Gina sat directly across from me. She leaned back, crossed her arms, and listened. I told her about the boots, the candle, the nickname, the woman in the bed. I told her exactly what Caleb said about me making a big deal out of nothing. I told her about the Capital One envelope he hid in the drawer. Gina did not interrupt. She did not offer me a tissue. When I finally stopped talking, she leaned forward and rested her elbows on the table. "Whose name is on the lease for your new apartment?" Gina asked. I opened my mouth to say both of ours, but the words stuck in my throat. I had never actually read the lease. Caleb told me he would handle the paperwork so I could focus on picking out curtains and booking the wedding florist. I just smiled and thanked him for taking care of it. "My ex-husband hid $30,000 in gambling debt under my name," Gina said flatly. "He opened credit cards I never signed for. By the time I found out, my credit was completely destroyed. I could not get approved for my own apartment. I could not finance a reliable car. I could not even get approved for a basic cell phone plan, all because my name was sitting on paper I never bothered to look at." "But Caleb would not do that," I said. "I said the exact same thing about Mike," Gina replied, word for word. My stomach tightened. An old memory rose up and caught me squarely in the chest. I was 14 years old, standing in our tiny kitchen in Nampa. My mother was crying over a pile of final notice utility bills. My father had taken out loans in her name and disappeared. I remembered my mother looking up at me, her eyes red and swollen, telling me that my name was all I really owned in this world and warning me to never let anyone borrow it. I swore to myself I would never end up like her, and yet here I sat. I looked at the computer monitor on Gina's desk. "You can open that file here," Gina said quietly, "if you want to know." I stood up. I walked over to her desk and sat down in her rolling chair. I logged into my Google Drive. My hand hovered over the computer mouse. I clicked on the document titled Lease Final 3842 Elm Street. The PDF loaded. The first page looked perfectly normal. It listed the address of the house, the monthly rent amount, and the security deposit requirements. I scrolled down to the second page. Under the section labeled Tenants, there were 2 names printed in bold black ink, Caleb Whitmore and Piper Hale. My name was nowhere on the document. I checked the date at the bottom of the page. The lease was signed 4 months ago. 2 full weeks before I packed all my boxes and moved my life to Boise to be with him. The buzzing of the fluorescent lights suddenly sounded incredibly loud. The smell of the burnt coffee made my throat close up. I kept my hand flat on the desk to stop it from shaking. He told me the paperwork was just a formality, I whispered to the glowing screen. Gina stood behind me. She looked at the names on the lease. She did not express pity. What do you want to do? What did you wish someone had told you to do? I asked, when you found out about Mike's document? Absolutely everything, Gina said. Before he knows that you know. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. I opened my notes application. I tapped the screen and began typing a new list. Things I need to check. The heavy scent of roasted salmon and garlic butter hit my face before I even turned my key in the lock of our apartment door. I stepped inside and carefully hung my jacket on the brass hook in the hallway. The apartment was immaculate. The vanilla candle from this afternoon was gone. In its place, a citrus candle burned brightly on the kitchen counter, masking any lingering smell of the woman who had been in my bed. Caleb stood by the stove. He wore a fresh button-down shirt and a soft smile. He had poured 2 glasses of red wine and set the dining table with our good plates. He pulled out my chair for me as I walked into the kitchen. "How was your day, babe?" he asked. His voice was smooth and perfectly leveled. I looked at the piece of salmon on my plate. I picked up my fork. "It was fine," I said. I forced the corners of my mouth up into a shape that resembled a smile. Caleb sat down across from me and casually cut into his dinner. I was thinking we should move the rehearsal dinner to Friday instead of Thursday. More of my family from out of town can make it if we push it back a day. Did you call the restaurant yet? I kept my eyes focused on my plate. I took a bite of the fish. It tasted like nothing. That sounds perfect, I said. My voice sounded remarkably normal. I will call them tomorrow. He nodded, taking a sip of his wine. He reached across the table and placed his hand over mine. His palm was warm. "Oh, and about earlier," I texted her. I told her she absolutely cannot just show up here like that again. I was so angry when she walked in while I was getting ready for work. It will not happen again. I promise. I slowly pulled my hand out from under his to pick up my wine glass. "Okay," I said. "Okay." One simple word. It was exactly the word Caleb needed to hear, to believe his narrative had worked. He needed me to be compliant so he could continue managing our lives without interference. I gave him the word like an injection of anesthesia, just enough to keep him perfectly still while I prepared to work. After we finished eating, Caleb kissed the top of my head and walked into the bathroom to take a shower. I waited until I heard the heavy spray of water hitting the fiberglass tub. I had perhaps 10 or 15 minutes. I stood up and walked silently to the kitchen island. I opened the top drawer. The stack of mail sat exactly where he had shoved it earlier that afternoon. I pushed aside the grocery circulars and the electric bill. My fingers found the thick white envelope from Capital One. My name was printed across the transparent window. Kelsey Marsh. I did not open it. I slipped the envelope into the deep pocket of my work jacket, hanging by the door, walked back to the kitchen, and began washing the dishes as the shower ran. The next morning, the break room at the dental clinic was empty, except for Gina and me. I placed the white envelope on the table. Gina stood next to my chair, holding a mug of black coffee, watching my hands. I slid my fingernail under the flap and tore the paper. It was not a promotional offer for a new card. It was a formal welcome letter and an account statement for a credit card that was already fully active. I stared at the bold black numbers printed at the top of the page. The credit limit was $15,000. The current statement balance was $12,400. The effective date was 3 months ago. I looked up at Gina. "I did not open this card." "I know," she said quietly. I picked up my phone, placed it on the table, and dialed the customer service number on the back of the statement. I pressed the button for the speakerphone. We listened to 3 minutes of automated hold music before a representative answered. I verified my identity using my social security number and my date of birth. "I need to check the contact information on this account," I told the representative. "Can you tell me the email address on file?" the woman on the phone typed loudly. "The email address registered is calebw_finances@gmail.com. I closed my eyes. I had never seen that email address in my entire life. And the billing address, I asked. 3842 Elm Street, the representative replied. The house. The lease with Piper Hale. He was having the credit card statements mailed to the house where the other woman lived, ensuring I would never find them in our apartment mailbox. Can you read me the most recent charges? I asked. My voice sounded hollow, echoing in the small break room. The representative began listing them. There were charges for living room furniture. There were charges for kitchen appliances. There was a massive charge that perfectly matched a security deposit and first month of rent. And then came the final line item on the statement. There is a charge for $2,100 at K Jewelers, she read. I stopped breathing. The fluorescent lights above me seemed to flicker. Thank you, I told the woman. That is all I needed. I ended the call and the break room fell back into a heavy silence. I looked down at my left hand. The silver band around my ring finger felt suddenly heavy and incredibly cheap. He bought me my engagement ring for $800, I whispered. He told me he found a great deal. He was so proud of it. Gina did not say a word. She just stared at the piece of paper on the table. $2,100, I repeated. The numbers tasted bitter in my mouth. That is not my ring. He used my name. He used my social security number. He opened a line of credit under my identity to pay rent for Piper, to furnish a house for Piper, and to buy a diamond ring for Piper. And he did it all using a false email address so I would carry the debt while he played the devoted provider. My father had done the exact same thing to my mother 14 years ago. The pattern was so identical, it made my chest ache. I gripped the edges of the paper statement with both hands. I held it so tightly my knuckles turned white. If I let go of the paper, I knew I would drive back to the apartment, scream at him, and shatter every plate in the kitchen. But Caleb knew how to handle screaming. He thrived in chaos because he could always twist my anger to make me look completely unhinged. You need to go to the police station, Gina said, breaking the silence. You need to file a report today, before he has any idea that you know about this card. The Boise Police Department precinct was aggressively air-conditioned. The waiting room smelled of industrial floor wax and stale coffee. I sat in a hard plastic chair across from a uniformed officer, while Gina sat silently in the chair next to me. I handed the officer the printed lease from my Google Drive and the Capital One statement. I kept my voice measured and precise. I used my calmest patient explanation voice. I told him I did not sign the lease and I did not authorize the credit card. The officer typed methodically on his keyboard, pausing occasionally to ask for a date or a spelling. When we finished, he handed me a small card with a case number written in blue ink. Identity theft. It was officially a federal crime on paper. I walked out to the parking lot and sat in the driver's seat of Caleb's car. The afternoon heat was suffocating. I pulled out my phone and accessed the websites for Equifax, TransUnion, and Experian. I placed a complete security freeze on my credit profile, blocking anyone from opening another account in my name. Then I opened the notes application on my phone. I scrolled down to the list of wedding vendors. Caleb had always insisted on handling the money. He loved the appearance of paying for everything. But when it came to the actual liability, he had conveniently asked me to sign every single contract. The venue, the caterer, the florist, the photographer. My name was on all of them. He thought he was protecting his own assets in case something went wrong. He did not realize he had handed me the power to destroy the entire event. I called the wedding venue first. The event coordinator answered with a cheerful greeting. "Hi, this is Kelsey Marsh," I said, leaning my head back against the car seat. "I need to discuss the cancellation terms for the Whitmore Marsh wedding scheduled for September 14th. The coordinator dropped her cheerful tone immediately. She typed on her computer. "I see your contract here, Miss Marsh. You put down a deposit of $3,500. Our policy states that if you cancel more than 30 days before the event, you are entitled to a 60% refund. The wedding was exactly 5 weeks away. I am canceling, I told her. Please process the refund. $2,100. Confirmed. I called the caterer next. The deposit was $2,000. I canceled the order and secured a refund of $1,200. I called the florist. The $800 deposit was non-refundable, but they offered a transferable store credit. I accepted it. I sat in the sweltering car and looked at the digital list on my screen. Police report filed. Credit frozen. Vendors canceled. Lease evidence secured. Fraud documented. For the first time in 3 years, the tight knot of anxiety that permanently lived behind my ribs completely vanished. I felt a sudden rushing sense of control. I was systematically tearing down the fake life Caleb had built, and he had absolutely no idea. I imagined him sitting in his office, checking his spreadsheets, entirely unaware that the wedding he was planning no longer existed. I had beaten him at his own game. I drove back to the apartment that evening feeling lighter than I had in months. When I walked through the door, Caleb was sitting on the living room sofa watching a baseball game. He smiled at me, stood up, and wrapped his arm around my shoulder. He kissed my cheek. He was performing the role of the loving partner flawlessly. "Long day?" he asked. "Very long," I replied. I walked into the kitchen to get a glass of water. Caleb's phone was resting on the glass coffee table in front of the sofa. As I turned around, the screen lit up brightly in the dim room. A text message notification appeared. The contact name was listed simply as Mom. I stopped walking. From where I stood, the text on the screen was large and clear. "She will come around, honey. All brides get cold feet. Just be patient with her." The glass of water in my hand suddenly felt very heavy. The feeling of victory I had carried all afternoon instantly evaporated. Caleb did not know I had canceled the wedding vendors, but he already knew I was pulling away. He had not spent his day checking spreadsheets. He had spent his day calling his mother, feeding her a fabricated story about me being overwhelmed and stressed about the wedding. He was building his defense network. He was constructing a narrative where I was emotionally unstable, and he was the patient, suffering fiancé. Before I could look away, the phone screen lit up with a second message from his mother. Maybe I should call her. Woman to woman. My phone vibrated against my hip inside the pocket of my work scrubs. I pulled it out while standing in the narrow hallway between examination rooms. The caller identification displayed Janet, Caleb's mother. I stared at the glowing letters for a moment, listening to the high-pitched whine of a dental drill down the hall before sliding my thumb across the screen. "Hi, Janet," I said. I kept my voice perfectly level. "Sweetheart," Janet sighed, her tone dripping with warm maternal concern. "Caleb called me last night. He told me you two have hit a bit of a rough patch. I just wanted to call and check on you." I pressed my back against the painted drywall. "It is a little more complicated than a rough patch." "Oh, honey, I know it feels that way right now," Janet said. She spoke with the soothing cadence of a woman who had spent 30 years answering phones at a pediatric clinic. "Cold feet are completely normal. When I was getting ready to marry his father, I almost canceled the caterer twice. The pressure of a wedding just makes everything feel so heavy." I gripped the phone tighter. Caleb had executed his plan flawlessly. He reached the jury before I even stepped into the courtroom. "But you two have something so special," Janet continued, her voice softening further. "Do not throw a beautiful life away over one bad week. He loves you. I have never seen my son love anyone the way he loves you." I opened my mouth. The words were right there on my tongue. I wanted to tell her about the woman in my bed. I wanted to ask her if Caleb loved Piper Hale the same way. But if I said the name Janet, would immediately call Caleb. Caleb would know I had seen the lease and found the credit card. The element of surprise was the only leverage I possessed. "You are right, Janet," I said quietly. "I will think about it." "Take a deep breath, baby," she said. "I love you both." I ended the call and let my hand drop to my side. Caleb was using his mother as a weapon, and the most terrifying part was that Janet genuinely believed she was helping. She was not malicious. She simply trusted her son. His lies worked because the people who loved him desperately wanted to believe he was a good man. A paper cup of hot coffee appeared in my peripheral vision. Gina stood beside me, holding out the cup. She did not ask who had been on the phone. She looked at my face and knew. "His mom," Gina asked. I nodded, taking the coffee. The heat seeped into my cold fingers. "Mine called my mother-in-law too," Gina said, leaning her shoulder against the wall next to me. "He used the exact same script. He told her I was overreacting to financial stress. It is a playbook, Kelsey. They all read from the exact same pages. You are not crazy." I took a slow sip of the coffee. The bitter taste grounded me. I survived the rest of my shift, went home and spent Friday evening and most of Saturday pretending everything was perfectly fine. I washed our clothes. I folded his shirts. I smiled when he kissed my forehead. But the tension finally snapped on Saturday night. I stood at the kitchen counter, rhythmically slicing a yellow onion on the heavy wooden cutting board. The apartment smelled of olive oil and roasting garlic. The front door clicked open, and Caleb walked in carrying a plastic grocery bag and wearing a massive, confident smile. "Great news," he announced, setting the bag on the island. "I just got off the phone with Pastor Williams. He officially confirmed September 14th for the ceremony, and I put down another $2,000 for the photographer upgrade." Surprise. The knife stopped moving. I left the blade resting against the wood. $2,000. The joint checking account only had $8,000 in it, and that was supposed to cover the remaining venue balance. "Which account did you use?" I asked. "The joint account," Caleb said, cheerfully walking around the island to stand next to me. "Why?" I turned my head and looked at him. The kitchen faucet dripped a single drop of water into the stainless steel sink. It sounded incredibly loud. "And the lease," I said, my voice dropping lower. "For this apartment, whose name is on it." For half a second, his smile vanished. His facial muscles completely relaxed into a blank, unreadable mask. Then, just as quickly, the smile returned, though it did not reach his eyes. "Both our names," he said lightly. "You know that. You were there when we signed." "I was not," I replied. I turned my body to face him fully. "You told me to wait in the car because you said the leasing office was crowded and it was just a signature." "I never signed anything, Caleb." His posture shifted. He stood up straighter, looking down at me. The soft, cheerful tone disappeared, replaced by a slow, condescending drawl. "Are you going through my things? Is that what this is about?" He shook his head, looking deeply disappointed. "Because that is really concerning, Kelsey. That is not normal behavior." "Whose name is on the lease?" I asked again. He threw his hands up in the air and took a step back, pacing away from the counter. "You are accusing me of what exactly? Cheating fraud. Do you hear yourself right now?" He pointed a finger at the floor. "I have been working 60 hours a week to give us a good life. I am paying for this wedding. And this is the thanks I get. You interrogate me in my own kitchen." I kept my hands resting flat on the edge of the counter. I refused to raise my voice to match his. Caleb stopped pacing. He stared at me for a long moment, his chest heaving slightly. He recognized that the loud indignation was not working. He needed a different weapon. He lowered his hand and let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "You know what he said," his voice quiet and sharp as glass. "Maybe your mom was right. Maybe you do have deep trust issues. Maybe you ruin good things because you are so terrified of being happy. Maybe that is exactly why your dad left, because nobody in your family knows how to trust anyone." The words hit my chest with the physical force of a closed fist. He used my father. He took the deepest, most vulnerable secret I had ever given him, a story I had whispered into his chest in the dark during our first year together, and he loaded it into a gun and fired it at me. He knew exactly where the armor was thinnest. I stood perfectly still. The air left my lungs, and for the first time in 3 days, a horrible, creeping doubt leaked into my mind. I looked at his angry, hurt face, and the ground beneath me felt entirely unstable. What if I was wrong? What if the lease really was just a clerical error? What if the credit card was some bizarre mistake? If I kept pushing, I would lose the apartment, the wedding, and the man I had built my entire adult life around. I would have absolutely nothing. I would be exactly like my mother, alone and bitter. Caleb watched my face. He saw the exact moment my certainty fractured. He stepped forward and wrapped his arms tightly around my waist, pulling me against his chest. His voice shifted instantly, melting into a soft, comforting murmur. "Baby, I am so sorry," he whispered into my hair. "I should never have said that. I am just so stressed out about the wedding and work. Come here. We are going to figure this out. Together." My brain chose the path of least resistance. I nodded against his shoulder. I closed my eyes and let him hold me, surrendering the fight because I was too exhausted to carry the weight of the truth. We slept in the same bed that night. At 4:47 in the morning, my eyes opened in the dark. Caleb was snoring softly beside me. The rhythm was steady and peaceful, the deep sleep of a man who had absolutely nothing to lose. I slid out from under the heavy blankets. I walked silently across the bedroom carpet, stepped into the bathroom, and carefully pushed the door shut until it clicked. I slid down the wall and sat on the floor. The square ceramic tiles were freezing against the bare skin of my thighs. The cold seeped directly through my thin pajama shorts. A single strip of yellow light from the street lamp outside filtered through the frosted bathroom window, cutting a pale line across the floorboards. Through the wall, I could still hear the faint, rhythmic sound of Caleb breathing. I pressed the palm of my hand flat against the rough texture of the shower wall, needing something solid to anchor me to reality. I sat in the dark and finally looked directly at the terrifying truth I had been avoiding for 3 years. If I left him today, what did I actually have? I did not have a house. My name was not on the rental agreement. I did not have a car. I had sold my reliable sedan so we could share his expensive truck. I did not have my own savings. Every paycheck I earned at the clinic went directly into our joint checking account, which he managed. I did not have a career path. I had abandoned my application for the dental school bridge program because Caleb told me I did not need the stress of studying when he could easily provide for both of us. I did not have a network of friends in Boise. I had moved away from everyone I knew in Nampa to be with him. The only piece of paper in this entire city that bore my name was a $15,000 credit card debt I did not authorize. I traced the grout line between the tiles with my index finger. I had not just been tricked. I had participated in my own erasure. I had handed him the eraser and watched him rub away my future, my mobility, and my financial independence, all while smiling and thanking him for taking care of me. My mother had warned me. She stood in that kitchen 14 years ago and told me my name was the only thing I truly owned. I had sworn I would never repeat her mistakes. But I had. I simply chose a man who stayed in the house while he stole from me instead of a man who ran away. The crushing weight of sadness in my chest suddenly hardened into something cold and solid. The knot of fear completely dissolved. I did not want to save the wedding anymore. I did not want to save the relationship. I wanted my name back. I wanted it off the debt, and I wanted it on a new lease. I pulled my phone from the pocket of my shorts. The screen glared brightly in the dark bathroom. I opened the notes application and found the list I had started at the clinic. Things I need to check. I highlighted the title and pressed the delete key. I typed a new heading. Things I need back. Line 1, my name. Line 2, my credit. Line 3, my money. Line 4, my future. I locked the screen. I stood up and splashed cold water on my face from the sink. I did not look in the mirror. I did not need to. I walked quietly out of the bathroom and crossed the bedroom. Caleb snored loudly, rolling onto his side. I picked up his spare truck keys from the nightstand. I walked out the front door into the cool, dark morning. It was just past 5 in the morning. The streets were completely empty. I started the truck and drove toward the 24-hour retail store on the edge of town. I needed to buy 4 large cardboard boxes. I sat on Gina's gray sofa on Sunday afternoon, staring at the 4 cardboard boxes resting on her living room floor. I had packed them quickly and quietly while Caleb was at the gym. Clothes, important papers, my laptop, a framed photograph of my mother. I took nothing that belonged to him. I took nothing we bought together. The digital list on my phone was no longer just a collection of angry thoughts. It was a fully realized plan. The police report for identity theft was filed. The Federal Trade Commission report was submitted. I had officially opened a fraud dispute with Capital One. I was not liable for the debt because I never signed the application. Earlier that morning, I transferred $3,200 out of our joint checking account. It was the exact amount of my own paychecks I had deposited over the last 2 months, backed up by my pay stubs. I opened a new checking account at a small credit union down the street. The wedding venue refund and the catering refund were already routing to my new account. I would use that money to pay my mother back the $6,000 she had contributed to the wedding. Gina handed me a mug of tea and sat in the armchair across from me. She asked if Caleb knew where I was. I told her he thought I was at the store buying new throw pillows for the living room. I returned to the apartment at 7 in the evening. Caleb stood in the kitchen. He was cooking salmon again. The stereo played a low acoustic melody. He had absolutely no idea my clothes were gone. I walked to the kitchen island and sat on the tall wooden stool. I placed a thick manila folder flat on the granite counter. I did not throw it. I did not slam it. I set it down with the exact same care I used when placing a paper bib on a patient. I told him to sit down. Caleb looked at the folder. He smiled, holding a pair of metal tongs, and asked if it was more wedding paperwork. I told him again to sit down. He turned off the stove, wiped his hands on a towel, and took the seat next to me. I opened the folder. I turned to the first page. I read the lease for the house on Elm Street aloud. I read the names of the tenants, Caleb Whitmore and Piper Hale. I read the date it was signed 4 months ago, exactly 2 weeks before I packed my life into boxes and moved to Boise for him. Caleb opened his mouth and said he could explain. I told him not to speak. I turned to the second page. I read the Capital One welcome letter. I read my name. I read my social security number. I read his secret email address. I read the total balance of $12,400. I told him I never signed the application. Caleb leaned forward, his hands flat on his knees. He said the card was for us, for our future, for the house. I stopped him. I read the final charge on the statement, $2,100 at K Jewelers. I placed my hands flat on the cool granite counter. I reminded him that my engagement ring cost $800 because he told me he found a great deal. I looked directly into his eyes and asked him who got the $2,000 ring. The kitchen was completely silent. Caleb stared at the open folder. I watched his brain work. I watched him calculate his next move. He could not deny the paper. He could not attack me. He could not play the victim. He chose to beg. His shoulders slumped and his voice cracked. He pleaded with me. He swore Piper was a terrible mistake. He promised he was going to end it before our wedding. He swore he was going to tell me everything. I asked him when exactly he planned to tell me that he put another woman on the lease to our house. I asked him when he planned to mention that he opened a fraudulent credit card in my name to buy her jewelry. He stammered and said it was complicated. I pulled the folder toward me and closed it. I stood up. I told him it was not complicated at all. I told him I filed a police report for identity theft on Wednesday. I told him my credit was frozen. I told him I canceled every single wedding vendor because my name was on the contracts, not his. I told him I took my portion out of the joint account. I told him I did not live there anymore. Caleb looked up at me. His face morphed from confusion to calculation to sheer panic. He realized I had spent the entire week dismantling his life while he was cooking dinner and calling his mother. He stood up fast, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He yelled that I could not do this, that this was his apartment. I kept my voice low. I used a tone he had never heard from me before. "It is your apartment," I said. "Your name is on the lease. Yours and Piper's. Mine was now on it." I let the silence hang in the air for a long moment. "My name was only on the debt," I said. I turned and walked toward the front door. I did not have a garment bag. I did not have coffee. I only had the spare keys to Gina's car in my pocket. Caleb shouted my name down the hallway. He told me I was making a massive mistake. I did not turn around. I had heard that exact phrase 14 years ago in my mother's kitchen, spoken in my father's voice. I closed the door behind me. The doorbell at Gina's apartment rang on Monday evening. I opened the door and found Piper standing in the hallway. She did not look like the confident woman I saw in my bed last week. Her eyes were red. Her shoulders were slumped. She did not come to fight me. She came because Caleb had just done the exact same thing to her. She spoke quietly. She told me Caleb said our relationship was basically over. She told me he claimed the wedding was just to keep his mother happy and that he planned to file for separation immediately after. I told her there was no separation because we were not actually married. Piper nodded slowly. She told me Caleb promised the lease on the house was only temporary. He promised he would buy the house in both their names as soon as his credit score improved. She looked down at the floor. She told me she had just checked online and discovered his credit was perfect. It had always been perfect. I asked her what else he told her. Piper reached her left hand out and pulled the sleeve of her flannel shirt up. There, resting on her ring finger, was a diamond ring. The $2,100 ring from Kay Jewelers. He had proposed to her 3 weeks ago. He proposed to her in the apartment with my gray sheets, using a credit card he opened in my name. I looked at the ring. I realized I did not hate her at all. Piper was just another version of me. She had different hair and a different voice, but we shared the exact same flaw. We both trusted him. We were both just tools he used to build his perfect life. Caleb did not love anyone. Caleb loved control. I was his checkbook. She was his housing. I opened the door wider and asked if she wanted to come inside. Piper looked surprised. She asked why I would ever let her in. I told her I suspected Caleb told her exactly what he told me, and I thought we both needed to hear the other version of the story. 1 week later, I stood inside the small lobby of the credit union on Fairview Avenue. The early Tuesday morning light poured through the large plate glass windows, casting long, bright shadows across the carpet. I held a cheap blue plastic pen in my right hand. I was signing the final paperwork for a personal loan. It was a small loan, just $4,500. It was exactly enough to cover the security deposit and the first month of rent for a new apartment. The interest rate was terrible because my credit was still recovering from the fraud dispute, but I did not care. It was my money. It was my debt. It was my name. I pressed the pen into the paper and read every single line of the contract before I signed it. I had learned my lesson. Piper had shared all of her text messages with me. She sent me screenshots of Caleb promising to leave me after the wedding. She sent me messages where he bragged that I did not suspect a thing. I forwarded every single image to the police to add to my identity theft report. The credit card company was officially investigating the fraud, and they assured me I would likely not be held responsible for the $12,000. Janet had called me 2 days ago. She did not call to convince me to go back to her son. She called to tell me that Caleb's father had done the exact same thing to her 20 years ago. She told me she had paid off the secret credit cards to keep the peace, and she regretted it every day of her life. She told me I was doing the right thing. She cried on the phone. I just told her I was sorry. Caleb had left 11 voicemails on my phone. I did not block his number because the police told me to keep everything for evidence. His final voicemail arrived late last night. I listened to 8 seconds of heavy silence before his voice finally came through the speaker. He whispered that he did not understand how I did this to him. I did not call him back. I had absolutely nothing left to say to him. The refunds from the canceled wedding were processing. Piper had moved out of the rental house. Caleb was now sitting completely alone in a house with a lease that only bore his name. My new apartment was a tiny studio on State Street. It was on the second floor. It was only 450 square feet. But the lease only had one name on it: Kelsey Marsh. I walked out of the credit union and climbed into the passenger seat of Gina's car. I held the loan documents in my lap. Gina started the engine but left the car in park. She did not say a word. I looked down at my signature on the crisp white paper. I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed my mother's number. She answered on the first ring. Her voice was cautious. She asked if I was okay. I told her I needed to tell her something. I took a deep breath. I told her I was not getting married. The line went completely silent for a long moment. Then my mother asked if I was safe. I told her I was safe. I told her I had my own apartment. I told her my name was the only name on the lease. I looked out the car window at the bright morning sun warming the streets of Boise, and I told my mother I read every single line before I signed it. I heard her start to cry. She was not crying because she was sad. She was crying because she had waited 14 years to hear me say those words. Gina shifted the car into drive and pulled out of the parking lot. I did not know exactly what I was going to do next. I did not have a plan for next month or next year. But as I watched the city roll by, I felt a deep, steady peace settle into my chest. My name belonged to me again. The morning sun hits the single window of my State Street apartment completely differently than it did at the old place. It is smaller here. Exactly 450 square feet of space. But the air feels incredibly light. I sit at a small wooden table I bought from a local thrift store for $40. I am drinking hot black coffee from a ceramic mug that does not match any other dishes in my cabinet. And I have never been happier. In front of me sits a freshly printed application for the Advanced Dental Hygiene Bridge program at the university. I had thrown my original application in the trash 3 years ago when Caleb kissed my forehead and told me I did not need to work so hard, promising he would always take care of me. Today, I am filling it out in dark blue ink. My phone vibrates quietly against the wood of the table. It is an automated email from the credit bureau. I open it and read the screen. My credit score has steadily climbed back up to a healthy number. The $12,400 fraudulent debt from Capital One was officially wiped from my permanent record 6 months ago, the day the federal fraud investigation finally concluded in my favor. I take a slow sip of my coffee, listening to the quiet hum of my own refrigerator. Caleb ultimately pleaded guilty to a lesser misdemeanor charge of identity fraud to avoid a lengthy felony trial. The conviction was enough to trigger a termination clause at his investment firm. He lost his job. Without my pristine credit score to lean on, and without Piper contributing her graphic design salary to the rent, he could not afford the house on Elm Street. He broke the lease, packed his tailored shirts, and moved back into his mother's basement in Meridian. Janet never called me to defend him again. She simply watched the cycle repeat itself and finally accepted the truth about her son. Piper and I occasionally exchanged text messages. She moved back to Portland, bought a dog, and started her own design agency. We do not talk about him. We only talk about moving forward. I look down at the university application on my table. For 3 entire years, I firmly believed that love meant letting someone else carry the heavy thing. I thought romance meant surrendering the tedious details of my life to a man in a nice suit, because trusting someone completely felt like a beautiful fairy tale. I know better now. True safety does not come from a partner who tells you to sit in the car and not worry about the complicated paperwork. True safety comes from sitting at the desk and reading the paperwork yourself. It comes from maintaining your own bank account, knowing your own credit score, and never letting anyone borrow your identity, no matter how deeply you think you love them. Independence is not a lack of trust. Independence is the absolute requirement for a healthy partnership. I pick up my blue pen and sign the bottom line of the university application. Kelsey Marsh. I trace the curves of the letters pressing firmly into the paper. I think about all the women who are sitting in beautiful, expensive houses right now, drinking wine paid for by credit cards they have never seen, wondering why their stomachs tie into tight knots every time the Daily Mail arrives. I lived in that invisible cage, smiling through the panic, ignoring the strange shoes by the door and the unfamiliar receipts in the trash, because pretending was easier than confronting the terrifying reality of starting over. I am speaking into this microphone today because I know I am not the only woman who has handed over her keys and her name to keep the peace. If you are listening to my voice right now, whether you are driving to work or washing dishes in your kitchen, I want you to ask yourself a very hard question. When was the last time you checked the documents that control your life? Have you ever let someone manage your finances or your future because it felt easier than asking the uncomfortable questions? I want to hear your story. Tell me about the red flags you ignored or the moment you finally decided to pack your boxes and walk out the door. Share your experience in the comments, because speaking the truth out loud is exactly how we break the cycle. I promise you, from the bottom of my heart, starting completely over in a tiny, quiet room is 1,000,000 times better than sleeping in a beautiful bed that does not actually belong to you.